This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What's Next with Lacey, the podcast where I interview young professionals about their career journeys so far. We are back on video this week, so if you prefer to put a face to the name, then definitely head over to YouTube to watch this conversation there. This week, I'm so excited to share with you my interview with the lovely Michelle Griffin. Michelle is the CEO and founder of Griffin Resources. She is a mastermind in the world of HR, and her company specializes in helping small and mid-sized businesses figure out how to navigate the HR of it all. They help companies build the right team, analyze skill gaps, and navigate high-stake challenges like mergers, layoffs, and so much more. Honestly, I can't do justice in my little mini intro here to the powerhouse of a company that Michelle has built, so I'll let her explain more. Of course, we dive into her journey to CEO, as well as what this job actually entails for her specifically. There is truly so much to learn, as there always is. Perhaps, though, the craziest thing I learned in this episode was how to get away with setting my car on fire. Just kidding. Or am I? Anyway, I guess you'll have to listen to find out. When you have listened, make sure to drop me a follow, a comment, a like, a subscribe, or whatever else you can do in this day and age of the internet. And as always, please share with anyone and everyone who you can possibly think of. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Michelle. Michelle, it is so lovely to meet you. Welcome to What's Next. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We were just chatting before this, but you have had such an incredible career from my research, from what I just learned. I'm so excited to dive into all of it with you. But starting off plain and simple, can you just give us a brief overview of what your role looks like now, what your career is looking like right now? And you've started a company, multiple companies, but one in particular that we'll focus on today. What does your company do?
So I've had a long career in HR, and my higher education is in psychology. So my education is in something called industrial organizational psychology, which is the research behind the efficiency of human capital and how to make sure that you kind of have the right people in the right seats and that you are effectively using your human capital. So I get to use that education with the company that I own and operate. So I do have both a master's and a PhD in IO Psych. So I'm not actually a practicing IO psychologist, but I do have an education in that. So I started Griffin Resources back in 2019, basically kind of taking my history as an HR executive and being able to provide that type of education and knowledge and services to small to mid-sized businesses. And that idea kind of really took off. And I ended up, really growing the company pretty quickly. I got to 7 figures within 3 years. And so now I have 40 team members and about 85 clients, most of which are all in the United States. We do have some parent companies that are in foreign countries that come and set up subsidiaries or entities in the United States. So we do interface with companies in foreign countries to help them work out their, anything from HR to payroll, recruiting and growth needs in the United States. So as we have grown and taken on additional talent and team members ourselves, we've increased the types of industries that we serve and the types of companies that we serve. So the other interesting thing about this company is we are very industry agnostic. So we have clients that range from 2 employees to 500 employees, and they are everything from, small independently owned companies to large private equity firms. We also have government entities, and we have nonprofits and obviously for-profit companies. So everything blue collar, white collar, and everything in between. So those were kind of we focus more on the small to mid-sized businesses so that we can provide, those types of HR, payroll, and recruiting and business development services that most of the time they just can't afford to have on their own. And they're just not really needing to pay even a part-time or full-time person yet. And we kind of get to fill in that gap and provide that, business security for compliance and employment law and situations that they can get themselves into, because most businesses don't, business owners don't go into business to do those types of operations. They want to build and run their business.
Incredible, truly incredible that it has grown at such a scale in such a short amount of time, and you're providing such necessary needs. So where do you sit in all of that? Are you kind of helping out with the client work, or are you kind of now more on like a, macro level operations of your actual company?
About year 3 is when I got out of actually doing client work myself, and I primarily run the business. And so the role that I have now taken on myself is to be able to support the team members, make sure that they have the technology that they need, they are able to work together efficiently. We try to make sure that we have a lot of tech on the back end for that. One of the businesses we started is actually our own marketing and development, like basically company and team that only supports our company. So that company, that one's called Griffin Cloud, is not revenue generating on purpose. It is designed to support our other businesses that are revenue generating. We just use that company to share those resources. So we kind of became our own resource company in a way, when it came to certain things that we wanted to, share without having the same kind of thing. We're small enough that we just don't need our own marketing team or our own sales team, our own development team. So we share those resources with some of our other companies. But my role there is to kind of make sure all of those resources are available, they're efficient, that the team members know who to go to. So if it comes to, obviously cybersecurity, there's a lot of, phishing emails and scams. And so if anything happens, we have our IT support available and ready. So a lot of times team members will, panic and not know what to do. And I'm, making sure that our team is available for them for that. Also, I take on a lot of oversight for our sales and our own business development. So I still make sure that we have enough client work for all of our team members, that we're growing at a pace that makes sense. Kind of the decision of budgeting of when to hire new people versus taking on new clients, and what kind of marketing budgets and investment budgets do we have, and how are we using those resources. So I still have oversight over all of that.
Yeah. Do you miss the client side of it all at all?
Not at all. I think the thing that I definitely don't miss is obviously the deadlines. HR has a lot of deadlines. Payroll is very, very specific deadlines. I still run all of that and approve all that for my own company. So having to do that for anyone else is very demanding and very time consuming. So it's essentially kind of taking all of those responsibilities and just only doing it for my own companies, especially having, 6 companies that we have now. It's a lot to just own and operate. We only have payroll for 3 of the entities. So, kind of just making sure that we are budgeting and everything correctly for all of that is enough, I guess, in addition to making sure that the clients are still receiving the quality of work, and our team members are able to support those clients as needed. We don't want them stretched too thin, but because we are so fractional, we basically take the expertise of our team members and partner them with different companies. So for them to have a job, they usually have to get 5 or 6 clients. So it's a lot of, for them, it feels like a lot of part-time jobs. And so we don't want them to feel too stretched, and make sure that they're able to use their time wisely and have their own time management. One of the things that we did is we have our own leadership coach. We obviously provide leadership coaching as a service, and then we turned our leadership coach internal. And so all of our team members get to, meet with our leadership coach and have their own career coaching. And we really kind of make sure that they're very supported, and that we as a company know what their career goals are, so that we can align our growth with their goals, and kind of, make sure that we're growing at the same pace, and that we're able to elevate them where they want to be. And that's really worked out to keep team members long term, and also pivot them for whatever family planning they have.
Exactly.
Or,
I was just thinking
career planning, education planning, anything like that. So we try to stay really flexible. That's one thing we had to ask our team members what's important to them and why do they work here. And that flexibility, the work from home, being able to prioritize their family. All of that was really important. So we really made sure that as we grew, we were finding people that wanted to align with those values too.
So now that you have such an established company, are you a little bit more discerning, or are you changing it all in terms of what clients you're working with? Like what types of business? I know you said you're industry agnostic, but is there a plan to, like, I don't know, grow into larger companies, or are you kind of really interested about one industry that you haven't broken into yet, or what does that kind of look like?
But one of the goals that we have is working with private equity companies, because they tend to buy and evaluate companies pretty frequently. And a few things, we've done that a few times and it's worked out really well, because they will need to evaluate the company either that they are purchasing or evaluating. And one of the things that we can do is just do an audit and an overview of all of their HR and compliance. And so that has been situations where we've done an audit and provided a full compliance report and then kind of walk away. And so it's only been a one-off kind of thing that's happened every once in a while. But we really would like to work, exclusively or be a vendor of choice for a private equity firm that works with us over and over and over again to evaluate multiple investments that they're doing. And then also keep us on to help manage those improvement processes that they need to help them grow the business before they, ultimately want to sell it again and things like that. Mm-hmm. Working with different private equity companies, or even with our clients that are owned by private equity already, there's a lot of board decisions. There's a lot of people making those decisions. And oftentimes we're a piece of something that helps out and it works out well, but it would be nice to kind of be a little more established and having those partnerships. So we've been working to establish a lot of those relationships, and it's very relationship based. So those are some of the things that we've been working towards and building for a few years now. And as far as the industry is concerned, we are kind of trying to make sure that we get a lot of like word of mouth from our clients. So it's nice for them to know that, it doesn't really matter the type of company. So for example, we do work with a nonprofit school, and that company referred us to their CPA firm. So there's certain things where it's like, it doesn't really matter, but having clients refer clients and keeping the word out there that we can help out, that's probably the other thing, is making sure our marketing is out there.
Clarify something for me. The clients that you're bringing on, do they have an internal HR team that then you're working with, or are you functioning as their HR team, or does it depend on the client?
We do both. So it does depend on the client. So we will have some smaller businesses, let's say usually under 50 or under 75 employees, where they just aren't big enough to need their own HR person yet. And so we are the entire, HR, payroll, and whatever that might look like, and they get to customize the time and the need and the productivity that we provide. And then if usually right around 75 or more, we encourage them to have their own HR person. So oftentimes they may work with us, establish policies and procedures. We will even recruit and hire their HR person. We will transition to them and kind of send them on their way. We definitely try to make sure that our clients have the best that they need. And so we'll work ourselves out quite often and make sure that they are, because obviously it's more expensive to pay hourly than to just pay a person. Mm-hmm. So if it is more economical and feasible for a company to have, more time and pay a salary for a person, then we'll help them do that. When it's a much bigger company, like I mentioned, our largest client is 500 employees. We are a piece of theirs. So we may provide just additional support, because for a large client and they have an HR department, even their own team members can get, really thin on, some of the things that they're doing, especially if they do, another merger and acquisition, or they need to do a confidential recruitment search to, replace someone, under that they don't want to advertise for under their own branding. So oftentimes we'll have clients come to us and ask us to just do a confidential search and then continue to, use their own team for the rest of their own needs. And then oftentimes it's cheaper to come to us. We have obviously a large team. So if they just need some support for a small project or open enrollment, we just help them for a few, weeks or hours, and then, let them get back to business. So big companies we help out, as well as, being the normal HR on a regular basis too.
Got to make sense. So circling back to you specifically, talk me through a typical day for you, though I doubt that there is one, given you have obviously this and your work with Griffin Resources, and also you mentioned starting other companies. But what might a typical day look like for you?
I would say I have typical weeks because I have a lot of reoccurring meetings as I'm getting through some things. So oftentimes my mornings are spent with our tech team because we will often because we have our own development team, we can develop our own tech or improve our own tech. And that's often what we're doing. So I spend a lot of time making sure our CRM is working and has the efficiencies that are needed. And if we're realizing that there's something we're not utilizing to the best, we'll make sure to have reoccurring meetings until that project concludes. So, for example, today, I actually finished a project, which feels unbelievable to finish a project. But we were
congrats.
Thanks. But one of the things that we realized is that we really were disorganized when it came to the employees' phone numbers, and so everyone was assigned a phone number, but making sure that the access was working perfectly, everyone understood and knew how to use the technology of their phone number within the system. And all of that. So we've been, kind of going through and fine tuning what kind of access. And if we turn off access, what does that impact and how does that impact them? So we've been digging through that for the last few weeks and finally made sure that every single person had a phone number and that they were trained to use it. And today we finally concluded all of that and made sure everyone was on the same page for their phone numbers, and wrote an SOP and published our SOP. So that was kind of what we did for that. So most of my mornings are spent doing that. I still will attend sales meetings. So sometimes I will have a sales meeting depending on the level and the scope versus, someone on the sales team or one of the leaders getting involved. So I do have, department heads, and oftentimes they will get involved in the sales process to make sure we know what kind of hours and scope we're looking at so that we can make sure to earmark the right team members and things like that. So sometimes I'm involved in that process. So sometimes I'll have meetings for that. A lot of it is, going through my own emails, and I'll have a lot of tasks for different projects or proposals, or we do have a lot of lead sources. So some of the lead sources may be needing some feedback, and also, kind of evaluating where our budgets are going. And if something is needing new or more money spent on something, I'll be asked to evaluate that. And then when it comes to the other companies, a lot of times it's invoicing and then making sure that those companies are running smoothly. I'm currently in the process of setting up that sixth entity. So a lot of times that is now working with the owners of that company, the lawyers, the bankers, and, kind of getting all that paperwork in order. Today was the day where we were filing the FEIN numbers, and all of the articles of incorporation are all filed. And now we're kind of starting to pivot to work with the bank and making sure everything is signed properly and get the bank accounts opened, and then make sure that everything is funded properly. So those kinds of things that we'll do that. And then obviously I make time to volunteer my time for podcasts and, kind of helping out other business owners. Once I got into the entrepreneur mindset and kind of got out of being an HR practitioner, I really started to empathize with how hard it is to build and run a business. It really does take a decent amount of time and energy and the grind of, making sure that the marketing is working and all of that too, and really staying in the thick of it. And the more I'm involved, the better off the business really does kind of stay. So I really, make sure to share what I've learned with others. And oftentimes I'll even volunteer my time for other things. Like I'm actually speaking at the University of Tampa tonight to business students as well. That professor wants me to talk about obviously the different types of business structures, the different types of employee types, how to set up a market structure and a billing plan and things like that to really show what they've learned in the textbook and how it's applied in the real world. So I think it's a really cool way to give back and share the education. So I like the academic side of things too.
For sure.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
I mean, what's been running through my brain this whole time is like, I feel like an HR professional is the best person to set up and run a company because you just know everything about a company. You know how to take care of employees. You know how to, survey employees and see what they want. And I'm like, that is kind of the best part and the most important part of like starting a business is starting a business that people want to work at and stay at and help grow. So it does seem like HR professionals are the best people to do that.
Yeah, I talk with a lot of business owners and the ones that I like working with, which is really nice, I get to be picky about the types of clients we work with. I love working with business owners that feel like that's an investment and they know the value behind it. I don't like it when they think it's a necessary evil and they're just paying for it because someone told them they're required to, or they already got sued, they're already in trouble, they already have a disgruntled employee or an investigation underway, and they're realizing attorneys' pricing is really high. And then they start taking us out. So it's really nice when we work with business owners that care. And that's kind of what I tend to try to partner with so that there is a long-term relationship. Because if we've had business owners that have been convinced to work with us, and then the same kind of struggle that a lot of HR professionals have in the corporate world is they have to like just demonstrate their value over and over and over again. And it's just so exhausting. And so I don't like having to do that for any of my employees as well as to our clients.
Totally. On that note of, educating and helping others, when you were deciding back in 2019 to start this company, is there something that really surprised you about the process of starting a company, or maybe even in those early stages? Like, what was the most surprising factor of that?
Yeah, I think there was some things that I should have known, and especially as an HR person or someone that had been involved in HR, and payroll, I should say, and benefits. So obviously, I knew that there was employer paid benefits and employer taxes and things like that. But what I just never realized was obviously how expensive employees are, but how expensive they are in addition to their salary. And so the first time I ran payroll, it's not only like it blew my mind. The same taxes that come out of your check are mirrored and matched by the employer. And it's not, and some of them, there's additional fees on top of that. And so there's a lot of every payroll run is not only so when companies or business owners are budgeting for a person, a lot of times they're thinking, oh, well, I want to pay them $60,000 a year and that's my cost for them. And then we're like, well, hold on, don't forget that you have to contribute to their benefits. So if they choose benefits, like this is an additional cost. And, most companies, pay a few $100s per person per month into the benefits, whatever that budget might look like. And then on top of that, I'm like, don't forget your taxes that you have to also pay. And so if we're starting to work with a company, oftentimes they will start with having contractors, which may be misclassifying their people if they are just saying, well, I'll just start you as a contractor. And then, maybe I'll think about having employees later. And that can be, illegal especially depending on the state and depending on how you're treating them. And so oftentimes when our business owners come to us and they say, okay, I'm ready to take these 1099s and move them to being employees. And I'm like, that's great. The number you have been paying them, now take that and multiply it by these numbers because this is really the overhead to expect. And that budget is a real sticker shock. I'm surprised it was a sticker shock to me too, but it definitely was something I got used to pretty quickly. But I really didn't have my billing set up correctly because I was trying to be affordable to small businesses. So our bill rate was much lower. And then I obviously had to increase the bill rate to compensate for all of that overhead. And then the bigger I got, the more complex the business got. Obviously increase in my, liability insurance, workers' comp insurance, and some of those other like liabilities, that cybersecurity insurance and everything had to start kicking in. We also pay attorneys on retainer to support our people. So we have employment law. We actually have 3 employment law attorneys law firms, I should say, on retainer for us for different reasons, for different scopes and different price points, so that my team members always have lawyers to go to, because the other thing for HR is every single thing we touch has a law around it. And so we're not sure, or maybe the client is kind of being in a gray area, or maybe totally legal. We can go to the attorneys and ask for help and guidance and bring that, actual legal advice back to our clients. So all of that is a cost that we don't pass on to our clients other than the bill rate. So we pay all those bills and things like that. So there was definitely, as I was first setting up, I didn't account for all of those expenses, and then how to make sure that I'm pricing the bill rate to the clients correctly, and also accounting for all of that internal expense. It took me years to figure that out.
Yeah, I can't say, I'm nowhere near or may ever start a business, but I indeed also never really thought of the actual, more than just the salary that it costs to have an employee. So when did you feel like you'd made it in terms of your company, in terms of Griffin Resources? When did you start feeling comfortable in the work that you've done?
It definitely, I think, was right around the third year. I honestly didn't take the title CEO for a while, because I didn't feel like a proper CEO or whatever I thought that felt like or should have been, or the responsibilities that included. And I think it really, once I stepped away from being an HR practitioner and started learning how to really run the business, I was learning how to understand the financials and understand the P&L statements, and taking the numbers and understanding the story behind the numbers. My husband started meeting regularly with our CPA firm, and then I started sitting in on those meetings and, kind of giving some ideas of where I thought some general ledger items were misclassified, to make sure that they are in the right categories, so that we know how much exactly is being spent on, marketing or versus, other expenses. So we were kind of making sure things are categorized properly. And there were definitely some mistakes or some things that could have been easier for us to break out. And even now, those are probably still some of the things that I could be better at, or help out the business in a way that would help us understand different divisions. So for example, we have really segmented recruitment as a department. And then I started building up another person to run that division. And so she's actually worked for me for about 10 years now in different companies. I keep bringing her with me everywhere I go. And she went from being a recruiter to being a team lead to being an executive. And now she runs the entire, division of that. And, making sure that I kind of once I started to have a hierarchy and had someone else running the HR and payroll division, and, making sure that they understand where the business is at, and that way they can make, business decisions for their departments. Once I could do that, I think that's when I started to feel like, I earned the CEO title. I could say that confidently, and, still be able to, know how the business operates. And I still, obviously meet all the team members, even though I don't manage them anymore, but I want them to, to make sure that they feel like they have a way to get to me. They know who I am, and I don't want anyone to feel like I've kind of put myself on a pedestal. So I still stay pretty kind of grounded with them if I can. So I didn't want to I didn't want the company to get so big that it was, but once the bigger it got, the more I realized, I still wanted to make sure to recognize everyone's names and where they, which department they were in and how they worked and who they were and what their backgrounds were. But, eventually the companies do get pretty big. There's definitely things where it got, pretty big and really fun to obviously build the company. But it did take me a few years to feel like I accomplished that.
So exciting though. And it must be so incredible to be able to see your work grow and to see actually have a physical representation of what your hard work has done.
It's funny that you mentioned that. We actually had a photo shoot, and I'll show you what it looks like. It's this guy. So we got these in Griffin. So
that's amazing.
So we started getting these stuffed animals that were Griffins to represent us as, Griffin companies. And then we give them out at conferences and stuff like that. But we have smaller versions. That was a big one. But but when we did a photo shoot at one point, just to have, for all the team members that were local and kind of just have some new pictures and things like that, there is a moment where my husband and I decided to just stand up. It wasn't part of a schedule, but we just stood up there, and each of us had one of those like Griffins, and they have bandanas that have our logos on them. So he was holding his and I was holding mine. And that was a very weird manifestation of what our companies are. And it actually had a very weird feeling in the moment of like that there was a actual representation physically of what we have built. And so that was a really interesting, I'll send you the picture. You can put it with you.
Yeah, exactly. Really I'd love that. That's so special. That's so amazing. What a lovely moment to have for yourself and for your husband as well. So I guess to kind of wrap up this specific section and to kind of follow on from that, what do you love most about the work that you are doing now?
Twofold. So I think from the service side that we do for the clients, I really enjoy helping the small businesses. So when, we get really good feedback from companies and they're especially when they're willing to give us like a public testimonial of how we have really helped them change their company. A lot of the clients that when they are small and they stay small, they keep us for a long time. So some of our clients we've had for 4 or 5 years. And I was recently reading a testimonial from one of our clients that worded it as, we have helped them for over half a decade. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And, said that they were really able to run their business and feel successful and not have to worry or think about the ops and the HR side. And they could, run their business because they're a smaller business too. And so that I feel is really special, really making sure that, small businesses have the support that they need, that they don't usually get to see until, they're much bigger, and it really gives them a competitive edge. And then the other flip side of that is, internally with my team members, that I always want them to feel. That was one of the things, like from an HR perspective, as I mentioned before, it can be a thankless job. And I never wanted any one of my team members to feel that way. So it's like, if there's something where that maybe there's a personality clash, like not every person is the right fit for every client. And so if there's something that's just not the right fit, maybe either for them or for the client, we will, work to make improvements or change something out. And if there's something we can do to align that, we will. And so I feel like, or if someone, especially if someone has to leave the company, which does, obviously it's a very, serious reason why someone has to leave the company. We don't have a lot of turnover, but obviously we want to make sure that we have a great exit with that person. If they are, sometimes it's not even leaving for another job. They have to leave to go take care of family or, something other traumatic has happened. And so we want to make sure that they always have a place to come back to. We've rehired quite a few people over the years that come and go and ask to come back and things like that. So it's one of the things, we always want to be a good place to work and feel like they, are valued and that kind of thing.
So here's the thing with homemade meals. Eating them is great, but all the chopping and measuring and cleanup, not so much. With new one-pan assemble and bake meals from Blue Apron, you get all the flavor of homemade meals with a fraction of the work. Just assemble the pre-chopped ingredients, bake in the oven, and enjoy. Shop Assemble and Bake at BlueApron.com. Get 50% off your first 2 orders with code APRON50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit BlueApron.com/terms for more.
I want to jump back and talk about your journey a little bit, starting with what drew you first to the field of HR? What sparked your interest in this line of work?
I think people get into HR either 2 ways. One, they're forced into it because someone just started assigning them work to do that, and others purposely go in to the field. I was a little bit of both. So before my work in HR, I was an auto theft and arson investigator for an insurance company. And that was the job that I got right out of school from getting my undergrad. And I just kept that job for 6 years until I was salary capped as the, investigator, like from the desk job perspective. And then the career path for that was to be a special investigator in the field. And I was, my coworkers at that point had been in the job 20, 30 years. And I didn't want to be the one kind of going out into the field and having to, conduct the depositions and things like that. It was my job to read the depositions and, investigate from there. And so once I realized it wasn't like the lifelong plan, I was like, I need a new plan. And so I went back to school. That's when I got my master's in IO Psych. And I initially started my degree in human behavioral research. But at that point, it was like 2009. And obviously, the economy had crashed. Finding a job in that field when I didn't have an academic background, I didn't know how to write grants and the things that were needed to be in behavioral research. I was not finding a job. So I was like, well, I kind of dabbled at fighting that for like 6 months before I decided to switch my focus of my degree from human behavior to IO psychology. And I could do that without retaking any classes and things like that while I was still in my first year. So I remembered liking IO psychology from my undergrad years. And then I had to research what jobs go with IO psychology. And HR is essentially the work that comes out of IO psychology. So most of that's the actual practical application of it. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll go try to find a job in HR, not really knowing what the responsibilities were or what the job actually meant. So I kind of just looked at the job descriptions and then started applying for jobs, ended up getting a job through a recruiter and got my first job in HR, which at that point was a large tech company. I was at ConnectWise and I was the second HR person. And at the time I was hired, there was 300 people. So it was two of us to do all of the HR for 300 people. So I had all of the responsibilities. Most of the time for companies that large, you should have like specialized, areas of HR. So most of the time you don't actually do every single piece of HR. Most of the time you're only a benefits admin or you're only an onboarding specialist or, you can be what's called a generalist, but even that is actually a special job. A generalist is someone that only does the investigations and the written warnings and, kind of what people think of when they think of HR from the bad side. So there's different jobs, but we had to do all of it. And so I really got ingrained into knowing how to do all of that. And then obviously as the company grew, I was promoted to head of HR after 2 years in that position. And then by then I had a team of about 5 people. By the time I left there was about 850 employees across 10 states and 4 countries. And I ran HR for all of it. And then that company sold to private equity. And I and myself and many of the other team members in HR and many of the owners all moved on to other companies once it sold to private equity. I went to a smaller residential construction company that only had 100 employees in one state. And that is where I kind of got the idea to do what I do now or start the business, because even though they had 100 employees, that company had never had HR before. And the CFO was still doing everything. I mean, the CFO was literally filing for the background checks and all the onboarding and, payroll setup and everything. And I was just kind of, give it all to me. So I had to really earn the trust of the CFO to take that on. And since it was such a smaller company, I had the mental bandwidth to start my PhD. So that's when I started getting my PhD. And after only being there for 2 years is when I started this work started as an independent contractor. But I only had myself as an independent person for 3 months before I had 8 clients and hired 2 people. And that's when I started to kind of just grow it from there. So rather than turn away work and stay small, I just continued to grow the company.
You've mentioned a lot, obviously, your master's and your PhD. It's incredibly impressive. How do you think it has helped you in your work, either now or when you were more focused in HR specifically? I know it's obviously the degree for HR, but are there any specific elements that you're yes, this was really helpful?
There's a few things I think it did. There's in higher education, once you start getting into that doctoral level, you're taught critical thinking skills that you're not taught at any other level. So I can analyze data very, very quickly. And I was always good at math, but you don't have to be good at math. But I mean, you have to know statistics once you get to that level too. But I was also good at statistical analysis anyway. So it's really those types of things I have been able to analyze my business from an organizational standpoint. I can take information from my team members, throw it in spreadsheets in live time and start chatting through information as well as the raw data behind it, and then how to determine if that idea is going to be profitable, or how do we budget for that, and how can we grow to make sure we can afford that in the future, and what kind of decisions should we be making. So those are probably the things that I now have the ability to do that I wouldn't have had, I think, without having higher education and critical thinking skills to like the nth degree that you wouldn't normally have. I also I did not go to law school, but I have I had to read a lot of obviously a lot of journals, and so I can read employment law and understand what I'm reading, and then I can work with the attorneys to make sure that the interpretation is accurate, and how are we working with our clients. And then make sure if the clients need direct help, they go directly to the attorneys. But we have a really good way to kind of make sure if we're guiding them in the right direction. And then I usually step in to help if it's something on a higher level, which, most people aren't going to be able to sit down and read a lot of really dry information and draw from the information that they really need to do out of that. And I can do that. I also know how to conduct a lot of research very quickly because of just nothing but research papers for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
And I still have access to academic libraries and things like that too. So if the team members are wanting to know about a law that's changed or something like that, I can go to, most people don't know this, I'll give you a tip. You can go to Google Scholar. So if you Google and you type in the word scholar, you'll get taken to a page that is specific called Google Scholar. And there's a toggle between academic journals and law. And you can go to the law side and see what's, in different districts and how that impacts you. So a lot of times I will kind of do my own research and then take it to the attorneys and say, am I in the right direction? Can you help me kind of get from this point forward and make sure that it's going to hold up legally? And that can really save a lot of time and money because obviously we're cheaper than attorneys. So that has all really helped. And then obviously from the human aspect or that side of things, I tend to understand the financial impact when you have people that are unhappy. And most of the time people are like, well, they don't understand why, having, people that are unhappy or a toxic environment, or you care more about the manager, which often happens. People are like, well, the manager's really good, but they have a lot of turnover and they're creating toxic environments. But if they're still, creating a lot of, financial gain for the company, they may overlook certain areas. But overall, the people that are actually interacting with their clientele, that's going to trickle down and it's going to impact the company. And so those are some things that I think has really, really helped out with understanding how either with our clients and with ourselves, that, the way that we're interacting with our clients and then helping them to grow in the right direction. It's also like warm body syndrome. We're just hiring people for the sake of hiring versus actually addressing, are they the right fit? If you're not desperate for hiring, make sure that you're actually taking the time to evaluate the people and you're evaluating the job that they're going into and you're ready for that person. Feeling supported and understanding that they know what to do with you when you get there is really important. Some companies just don't have, the set up for onboarding properly, or they don't have the training set up. So people kind of just get thrown into a job and then they say, go start yourself versus, really having an onboarding and training plan for them to give them the right resources to do their job properly and actually fulfill whatever their role is.
Yeah. And feel happy at their company. Indeed, like you said, like when they're happy, they'll do better work and they'll stay. And it's an important part of the process for sure. Do you feel like I know you chose to do your master's to kind of do this career switch, but what inspired you to do your PhD? Did you feel like it was necessary so that you could do all of this extra analytical work and have all these added benefits? Or was it just kind of an academic curiosity as well?
I don't know, honestly. I think I always wanted to be called a doctor, and I think I just always wanted the terminal degree just for the sake of having it. My grandparents' era was very highly educated. My parents and their siblings were not, so it skipped a generation. But my dad's mother had 2 master's degree and a PhD. And wow. And my dad's dad was a veterinarian, and then my great uncle was an attorney, so it had a Juris Doctorate. So I mean, everyone at that level had some kind of doctorate, And that's probably why my parents' generation just were like, no, we're good. So we're, having them to look up to, especially if we kind of look back at, older times and going to college that far wasn't the norm for older generations. But I always had that to look up to. But for myself, I think the other thing I wanted was a long-term career so that I would have something to look forward to that, can't really be taken away from you. So obviously, once you finish a degree and you have that piece of paper, that kind of follows you around. So if you've got a bachelor's, you can go back for a master's at any time. But if you don't finish and you just drop out of school or just don't finish the degree, you have to go back to finish to keep moving forward. So there were just points where I was like, I'll go back whenever I kind of want to. I forget how painful it was to be in school. It takes me about 5 years to forget how bad it was, and then I'll go back again.
Then it sounds fun again. Yes.
Like, that sounds great. But I that way, if I wanted to do a professorship in the future, if I wanted to conduct more research, write books, I kind of wanted to open up doors that would be available in the future. So that was the other kind of like drive for it, which was interesting because I didn't have a topic of research going into my degree that I was so excited about. And it was interesting with my school because they were really, really great with supporting us. But the other thing was they kind of start you at researching your topic from the very beginning. So even when you're in coursework, so most of the time you do coursework and then you do your, your dissertation afterwards. And through the whole process, they're kind of having us in every class. We have to like turn in new research that we have to kind of fine tune our topic. And it really did take me a few years to figure out what part of business I wanted to focus on and research and find something that would be interesting enough to keep going for 3 years that it took me to actually conduct my own research. It took me 5.5 years to do my whole degree, though.
Can I ask what ended up being your topic?
Yeah.
What were you researching?
So I ended up looking at what's called reverse knowledge transfer. So it's the subsidiary passing information back up to the parent company. Hopefully the parent company cares. And then I was like, well, let me take that and make it like one step further and make it harder and go across international borders and then look at areas of influence that might impact that, like either the distance or technology or language or culture. And also what I didn't realize was, the generational gap. So that also, that was not one of the variables I originally named, and they brought it up a lot. And then I ended up doing a case study of a company in Macedonia and Serbia, just because I needed some company that was in 2 countries. And I ended up getting connected to them through, different various connections and ended up doing it there and learned quite a bit when it came to, if people trusted technology, if they, chose to have a preference for in-person or not. And obviously that would vary based on the generation and things like that too. I started my research obviously before COVID, since I started my degree in 2018. So by the time we were in COVID was when I was doing my data collection. So that had a big impact on, I think, the results too, as we were kind of coming into the shutdown and everything being required to be remote regardless.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. Gosh, what an interesting topic to explore. I want to talk a little bit about your auto theft adjustment and insurance work. What exactly does that mean? And have you utilized any of the skills that you learned from that work to what you do now?
So basically when someone, when you own a car and you have insurance, if your car is ever stolen or if there's a comp claim, which is like it floods, we did have, vehicles that would catch on fire. Sometimes they were set on fire, but those claims would come to me. So it was my job to take interviews, collect documentation to support their story, to either clear them or start to determine if there's enough holes or red flags in their stories to send it to special investigations. Oftentimes I would have to work with the fire marshal or the police department, and there'd be ongoing investigations into if someone, was obviously instead of being a victim, they were actually the culprit. And I also had to act as the like if we had to take someone to court, if we either found the person that did it or whatever, I would also appear in court or provide depositions for court for the company's witness. And because I worked for the insurance company. Mm-hmm. And so the first time I felt like I could actually use the information from, data collection of digging into someone's story was when I had someone call in sick, and we had a rule that basically was like, if you're sick, provide a doctor's note to come back to work, especially if you're going to be out for a couple of days. We were trying to prevent people from calling out sick if they weren't really sick, like take a personal day, whatever, but don't tell us you're sick and then say you come back to work and you're spreading, an illness or something. We were trying to prevent
Totally.
That. So that's all we were trying to prevent. So it's like, if you say sick, then we're going to take you seriously that you're really sick. Someone was just hungover, and they were like, are you sure? Like you're good to, don't come back unless you have a doctor's note if you got all these symptoms and stuff. And so they're like, yeah, I have a doctor's note. And then they show up and we're like, where's your doctor's note? And they're like, oh, I'll go get it. And then they went to like a walk-in clinic and came back. But what they had done was change the doctor's note to a previous day to say they backdated it and then, doctored it. And I could tell it just looked doctored. I think there was not like there was whiteout, but it was like a copy and it just looked slightly altered. So I reached out to the doctor's office and I was like, I need to confirm if this person was there. And they were like, obviously we're not going to confirm that. I said, okay, tell you what, I have a doctor's note. I'm going to send you the doctor's note by fax. You can either tell me if it's legit or send me, if it's not, send me the correct doctor's note. And so I faxed them that doctor's note. They sent me back the corrected doctor's note that was not altered. And so then we called that person in, and all we really just wanted them to admit that they had done that. They were not actually in that much trouble. We just wanted to have the conversation with them. And so we pulled them in the office. It was towards the end of the day, and we just slid both papers across the desk and said, we want to know what's going on here and talk to you about this. They literally threw their badge on the desk and said, I quit, and walked out, and didn't even defend themselves at all. They just walked out. So that was probably the first time where I was like, let's dig into some documents. But I would say for obviously investigative purposes, if there's issues with a company, we have to do an investigation. How to properly document that investigation. There's definitely things that are come out of the legal law firm side that kind of gives you guidance on how to protect the company as you're going through an investigation and making sure things are being handled properly. But obviously I had quite a bit of skill set when it came to doing that too. And then making sure that we're, being unbiased about the information and giving, information. So there's quite a few transferable skills, I think. But yeah, I have a lot of stories on how to get away with probably being able to do that from.
Exactly. That's the flip side of what you learned from this job is, how do I get away with it? I'm just kidding. But that is so funny. That is quite an epic story. And what a way to end a relationship with your employer, to just throw your badge on the table and say, I quit. That's crazy. Anyway, that is a hilarious story.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
I now want to turn to our advice section and get a little bit more specific advice from you before I do let you go. Starting with, first and foremost, what's the best career advice that you've ever received, and did you take it?
I did, and it's actually quite, especially been talking a lot about education. It's quite ironic what the advice was. So when I was newer to ConnectWise, I always had ambition to climb the corporate ladder, and a lot of that came from wanting a bigger paycheck, but also just wanting a seat at the table, not even knowing what that meant yet, but just kind of keep going in my career. And not everyone has those aspirations, but I did. Even in my early age, I was in my late 20s when I started working there, and I was still in school getting my master's degree, and where I was sat, my cubicle was right in front of the COO's office, and his office, it weren't completely glass, but he had very large like glass windows. And so his desk faced the window, which faced my cubicle. So he could always see me, just the way that it angled. And there was a guy at the company. He ran the one of the tech like troubleshoot areas. Like it was a tier 1 support for a tech support company. And so he ran that entire division, and he became my mentor. At one point, I think he was kind of giving me advice on like how to make sure to be seen and what that company valued for hard work. And he told me, pretty much stay late, be seen. And, he's like, if you really want the COO to, who I ultimately through a chain of command answered to him, but I had obviously like manager to manager to him. He's like, and especially, eventually getting promoted to answer directly to him. He was like, that's the guy you need to be seen by. So if he's still here, you stay. And he's like, that will go really far in that guy's book. You stay and he'll notice. And I was like, but I have schoolwork to go home to. And he said, nobody cares. And that's when I realized, like, unless I had the accomplishment, the work it takes to get there, nobody cares. And so I did. I started staying late. And I do remember being there on a Friday at like 6 o'clock at night or 6:30, whatever time it was. Nobody's really in the office, but I'm working, finding, obviously there's tons of work to do with a company that big and only being 2 of us in HR. So there's obviously always something to do. And he actually came out of his office and was like, what are you still doing here? And I was like, I'm doing all these things and telling him what I was doing. And he was like, I can't believe you're still here. And I was like, you're still here. And he was like, that's true. I am here. So he kind of saw that was, and then at one point he, obviously started to see me as an equal. And that's how I got promoted within 2 years to run the HR that company.
So do you think that advice of like, stay late, be seen, that is the part that really stuck with you, and that does work?
It worked for that generation, for the generation that I was working with to be promoted under, or to promoted to. In other companies, it really, I think, depends on the values of the company, which it didn't really work well in the other company that I went to. So I almost had to like reverse engineer some of my thinking, because when I went to the residential construction company, that one was interesting because they built homes. And so they really saw the community and your work-life balance very differently. The leadership team was a little older than what I had been working with. And so they really valued family. They really valued taking vacation and trips. Some of them actually did vacations together. Like the leadership team went to Oktoberfest in Germany.
Oh, wait, that's amazing.
And I was like, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
So they, honestly, in that company, if I was there past 4:30 or 5, I would be the last one to leave. If I was there till 6 o'clock at night, the cleaning crew was coming around.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, deciding that and discerning that from a company's values is such a good way to put it. Because indeed, I was like, I don't feel like that. I don't know how people feel about that now, that especially now that we're in this remote culture or hybrid culture, how that works anymore. But indeed, it's listening to a company's values is so important. Looking back at your career, at any point in your career, is there something you wish you'd known that you didn't at the time, and would be like to anyone, make sure you know this thing before you take the next step?
I think a lot of it would be my knowing myself and my own drive, because I think I was pretty hard on myself. And then maybe this is also like, depending on how you're brought up, if you were the type or had the type of parents where like you couldn't like watch TV or do anything fun unless you did your homework first kind of thing. I was pretty hard on myself for a long time too. If I had something to do at work, or if I had homework or something that was driving me, emails unanswered, trying to get all of the work done before relaxing, or feeling like if I am relaxing, I shouldn't be, because I should be doing something, to be a lot more kind to yourself and just be like, it'll be there tomorrow. The world's not going to end. It really, like if I didn't answer all those emails, I'll answer them in the morning. If it's 8 o'clock at night, it doesn't really matter. I can still do it tomorrow and make time for it and things like that. And, those are probably some of the things that I'll get really, even now I'll get really stressed about like anxiety of making sure that I do everything and obviously hit the right deadlines and things like that. But I would honestly say just to be kind to yourself, set your goals and, get your goals into smaller, manageable goals, but then, give yourself the grace and kindness to get through it.
That is excellent advice and something that I'm struggling with right now. In terms of like, I always feel like I need to be productive and I need to be doing something and I need to earn the time of when I'm not doing anything. So that is excellent advice that I will personally be taking. And then what advice would you give someone starting out in either the entrepreneurial space or the HR space? What advice would you give them for their very first step into either of those specific fields?
For starting out for an entrepreneur, I would say I really asked for a lot of help. And I turned to people that, they gave me a lot of free advice, which was great. I didn't pay advisors. A lot of people have to pay advisors, which, if you just surround yourself with really knowledgeable people and take their advice. So I met with a wealth management advisor who literally had to sit me down in his office and on a whiteboard draw out a pass-through tax and what an LLC does. I had no idea. I knew the term LLC. He's like, it's literally a limited liability corporation and separates it out. This is why you need to go get it. And this is how you go get it. So those were some of the things. I've talked to people that, instead of paying for an LLC, they paid for a C Corp or they paid thousands of dollars to a law firm. And I honestly, I found resources that it didn't cost me very much money, a few $100s to set up the company. And they'll write your articles of incorporation and things like that. I did end up, spending money that I didn't need to spend until I really started having the right resources, connecting with bankers and finding a bank that works for you. I ended up working with a small boutique bank that, has a few $1 billion in assets versus very, very large corporations. So I am essentially I ended up becoming, a decent sized fish in their pond versus, a drop in the bucket for them. And I have real people to talk to, whether it be my CPA firm, my corporate law firm, and my bank. And what's nice, I can put them in touch with each other. And so if they're like, where's their tax documents? Where's their tax extension? And I was like, I don't know, go talk to the CPA guy. You filed it.
Yeah.
And, if we're looking for, we'll renew our line of credit every year. And every year our bank is looking for documents that our CPA firm has. And I'm just like, I, rather than trying to make sure I go get something from a year ago, I can put them in touch with each other. So those types of relationships have been a game changer for how I can business and run my business, and finding those connections and resources and talking to people is really how I got there. Just networking and going out of, not just my own industry, but starting to network out in the community. And it was a friend that recommended the bank, and actually who was asking me to invest in the bank, which I did. I actually invested in them, which does help too. So I'm technically an investor and a client of theirs. But those are some of the things that I don't think most people think of. It took me that was literally year 3, 4. Like it was a long time before I started to take advantage of those relationships. And that's the other thing I think people feel if they are at a point where they feel like asking for help is a burden or taking advantage of those relationships is a burden, and it's not. They want to be there to help you. They want to reach out. They want to feel you succeed, because the more you succeed, the more obviously you'll use them, the more, it might just be a small invoice to them, but eventually, it's volume for them too. So those are really good business, setups and things like that I think people need to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how much help you can get from your own network. And I've always said that, ask your own friends, your own family, neighbors, whatever first, see what they can do, and then go beyond that. Well, it is almost time to wrap up, but I do have one more question for you. And that is for you, Michelle. What's next?
Wow. So I would obviously I have a lot of goals for, the strategies for the growth of the company and things like that. But one of the things that my husband and I have started to do is, we've always really taken advantage of travel, and we work remote. And so we're starting to get to the point where we can be gone longer. And so next year we're going to dabble in the idea of trying to be gone for a month. So we do work while we're gone. It's not like I take any vacation time. We can usually go about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks at most. So we do tend to travel because we do have a lot of like credit card points and things like that we can use to use for our travel. And so we have been traveling more frequently, and now we're taking it to the next level of actually, extending the travel and being gone. And that way we can really understand new cultures and things like that in other areas of the world. So far I have been to 35 countries. And
wow,
how far I can take that. But I always like to add to new countries, my country count. But in addition to that, going back to other areas and really, it's kind of like if someone said they went to New York City and saying they went to the United States. So I try to go back to different areas of the country, different cities, and really explore different areas. Portugal is probably the country I know the most. I have been literally to the north. I've been to the south. I've been to the major cities. So Portugal I know the most. But we keep going back and exploring different areas of Eastern Europe and going for Christmas market.
Oh, no one does it like European Christmas markets, I will say. Truly the best. That's amazing. That's so great. How fun. Well, I hope that happens. I hope you get to your full month. You certainly deserve it for sure. And this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on What's Next and telling us your story and sharing all of your very helpful advice, some of which I will also personally be taking. So yeah, good luck with Griffin Resources or your other companies. Good luck with all your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope there was a little bit of nuggets and takeaways for the listeners. And if anyone has any questions or just wants to reach out and chat, available.
Thank you. I love it.
Mom, I like to propose a dinner optimization plan for 2026. Soccer practice every week. Get back late and you're stressed out about making something fast, but actually nutritious for dinner. When Ashley's mom picked me up, I noticed that she made Blue Apron. It came in like a little kit, and by the time it was ready, I still had shin guards on. And it was real food, fresh veggies, protein, actual flavor. Take her from the younger generation. We're innovators, keeping a couple Blue Apron meals around. Not the worst idea.
Get 50% off your first 2 orders plus free shipping with code LISTEN50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.